Look at the headlines. I think the tone of the headlines, whenever people talk about Meghan, they never have a positive word to say about her. She has done a lot of good, but none of that ever gets commented on.
Is she serving herself? That seems to be the thrust of the
good she's done.
Yeah,
For me, she has inspired quite a lot of people of colour, because who would have ever thought a woman of colour would ever make it to the palace? And people treat Harry as if he's an idiot. This man is a grown man, and he is, I'm hoping, the man of his house. And at the end of the day, if he wasn't happy with what she was doing, they would have those discussions. But what I'm not happy with, it's just the tone of all of this. It's very distasteful. The UK, Britain should be a better place. The way this country has attacked her has been absolutely disgusting.
Let's talk about what just happened, because clearly not everyone in that studio was operating in the same dimension of reality. What we just witnessed was Paulette Hamilton, Labour Member of Parliament for Birmingham-Erdington, a woman who clearly woke up that morning and chose facts, do something so rare, so startling, so genuinely unexpected in British media discussions about Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, that it almost felt like a glitch in the Matrix. She used logic. I know, take a moment, breathe, process. Because apparently, in the specific media universe that has been constructed around Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, logic is not standard equipment. Logic doesn't come in the base package. Logic is the premium upgrade that most participants in these conversations apparently opted out of during the checkout process. What usually gets checked in at the door instead? Vibes, grudges, preloaded narratives, and whatever headline combination is most likely to generate maximum outrage before 9 a.m. But Paulette came in with something different. She came in with receipts, reasoning, and remarkable composure. And somehow, that felt revolutionary, which honestly says everything about the state of these conversations. Let's start exactly where Paulette started, because her opening move was deceptively simple and absolutely devastating. She said, "Look at the headlines." That's it. 4 syllables, 1 instruction. Not a lengthy thesis, not a complex academic argument, not a multi-point rebuttal requiring footnotes and citations. Just look. And here's why that's so powerful. Because it shifts the burden of proof from opinion back to observable reality. You don't have to agree with anyone's interpretation of Meghan. You don't have to take anyone's word for anything. You don't have to trust a fan, a critic, a commentator, or a panel guest. You just have to look. Open a browser, type the name, read what comes up. Not the articles themselves, though those are instructive too, just the headlines, the framing, the word choices, the adjectives, the implications buried in a question mark at the end of a sentence designed to plant suspicion while maintaining plausible deniability. Is Meghan's charity work really about the cause or about her image? Body language experts reveal what Meghan's smile is really hiding. Sources close to the palace say Meghan's behavior is raising concerns. Now, here's a little exercise. Try to find the equivalent headlines about literally any other member of the royal family, generated with the same frequency, the same intensity, the same relentless negative framing, sustained over the same number of years. Take your time. I'll be here. And if you come back empty-handed, which you will, then Paulette's 3-word argument has already done its job. Because the pattern is the proof. You don't need to win every individual debate about every individual story. You don't need to fact-check every unnamed source or untangle every royal expert's credentials. You just need to zoom out far enough to see the shape of it. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Here's where Paulette's argument gets sharper, because she identified something that is not just unfair, it is structurally, deliberately, inescapably designed to produce only one outcome. It doesn't matter what Meghan does. Not in the sense of the coverage isn't always fair, that would be a manageable complaint. In the sense that the conclusion has already been written, and every action Meghan takes gets reverse engineered to fit it. She speaks publicly, attention-seeking. She maintains privacy, calculating, hiding something. She engages with charitable causes. It's for the PR, it's for the brand. She steps back from public engagements. She's difficult. She doesn't want to work. She looks happy. She's performing. She looks serious. She's cold, unapproachable. She addresses the media directly, aggressive, inappropriate. She ignores the media, arrogant, out of touch. This is not a standard that was designed to be met. This is a maze with no exit, dressed up as a maze with multiple exits, so that when someone inevitably fails to escape it, it looks like their fault. She just can't seem to get it right. No, she can't get it right because right was never available to her. The doors were locked before she arrived. And Paulette pointed at this directly, not by listing every individual grievance, but by naming the structure of it. Because the structure is what matters. Individual unfair headlines happen, media bias happens, every public figure faces it to some degree. But a structure that produces only negative outcomes, regardless of the input? That's not bias. That's a system, a deliberate, self-sustaining, self-reinforcing system. And once you name it as such, coincidence stops being a valid explanation. This, right here, this sentence, because this is where things stop being abstract and become provable. Let's talk about what Meghan has actually done, not in the vague, general sense, concretely. The work with SmartWorks, a charity helping women re-enter the workforce, wasn't just a patronage appointment she attended twice a year for photo opportunities. She designed a clothing line with the organization, with proceeds going directly to support their programs. She was in the room. She was doing the work. The cookbook she produced with the Hub Community Kitchen following the Grenfell Tower fire wasn't a vanity project. It was developed in direct collaboration with the women of that community, raised significant funds for the kitchen, and kept the spotlight on a tragedy that the news cycle had largely moved on from. Those women, real people, not media constructs, spoke about what her involvement meant to them. The work she and Harry have done through the Archwell Foundation across mental health advocacy, humanitarian aid, digital safety, and community empowerment, these are not press release initiatives. These are funded, operational programs with measurable outputs. The work around vaccine equity during the pandemic, the support for Afghan refugees, the ongoing mental health advocacy that directly challenges stigma in communities where that stigma has historically caused enormous harm. These are not minor footnotes. These are not things that require charitable interpretation to recognize as meaningful. They are documented. They are verified. They are real. And yet, as Paulette observed, they receive a fraction of the coverage dedicated to a badly angled photo, an unnamed source's opinion, or a pronoun count from a charity speech. When the good work gets covered at all, it frequently comes with an asterisk. Meghan launches initiative, but is it genuine? The work gets acknowledged in the headline and undermined in the subtext. That's a very specific editorial choice, and it's being made consistently across multiple outlets over multiple years. Right on schedule, as predictably as rain in British summer, the interruption arrives. Is she serving herself? And this is such a perfect illustration of the mechanism Paulette was describing that it almost feels like it was staged for educational purposes. Think about what this question actually does. It doesn't dispute the action. It doesn't claim the charity work didn't happen. It doesn't argue the beneficiaries weren't helped. It simply poisons the intention. Because in this framework, it doesn't matter what you do, it matters why you do it. And if your why can be questioned, if any conceivable self-serving motive can be attached to your action, then the action itself becomes tainted. By this logic, a doctor who gains professional satisfaction from saving lives is serving themselves. A teacher who feels personal pride in their students' success is serving themselves. A politician who builds their reputation on effective public service is serving themselves. Under this standard, virtually all human action motivated by anything other than anonymous, invisible, completely thankless benevolence is suspect. And yet, somehow, this standard is not applied to other public figures who make headlines for their charity work. It's not deployed against every celebrity who shows up at a gala. It's not the default interpretive frame for every royal who visits a hospital. It's reserved with remarkable precision for one person. And Paulette called that out, not with a lengthy lecture, but by simply refusing to accept the premise. She reframed, she redirected, she brought it back to reality. Because that's all it takes sometimes. Not a counter-argument, just a refusal to play by rules that were rigged from the start. Paulette said something that, in any reasonable context, should be completely uncontroversial. A woman of color in the British royal family was meaningful. It was significant. For a great many people, it was genuinely historic. And yet, even the simple acknowledgement of that significance makes certain people deeply, visibly uncomfortable. Not because the observation is factually wrong, not because representation doesn't matter, but because acknowledging it requires engaging with a history that some people would very much prefer to treat as settled, resolved, and irrelevant to the present. The British royal family is one of the oldest, most symbolically loaded institutions in the world. It carries centuries of history. It carries the weight of empire, of colonialism, of the very specific and very deliberate story that was told about who belongs at the center of British national identity and who does not. For that institution to include a woman of mixed heritage, to welcome her, in principle, into its most intimate circle, was not nothing. It was not a minor stylistic update. It was the kind of moment that for people who had spent their lives seeing themselves nowhere in those gilded halls, carried genuine emotional weight. Paulette knew that. She said it plainly, without apology, without excessive drama. Who would have thought a woman of color would make it to the palace? And the discomfort that simple sentence produced in certain spaces tells us something important. It tells us that the discomfort with Meghan was never purely personal, never purely about this specific woman and her specific actions. It was also about what she represented. The disruption, the challenge, the implicit argument that these spaces, these ancient, heavily guarded, culturally coded spaces, were not as exclusively reserved as certain people had always assumed. That's an uncomfortable confrontation to have. And some people, it turns out, would rather construct an elaborate edifice of pronoun counts and private jet outrage than have it directly. Let us spend some time here, because this point deserves more than a passing mention. One of the most persistently insulting threads in the anti-Sussex media narrative is this idea that Harry, Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, a man in his late 30s, a veteran, a father, a person with lived experience of extraordinary circumstances, is somehow incapable of making autonomous decisions. That every choice he's made since meeting Meghan must be attributed to her influence. That he didn't choose to speak about his mental health, she pushed him. That he didn't choose to step back from royal duties, she manipulated him into it. That he doesn't maintain those choices, he's too deep in to see clearly. This narrative requires you to accept two things simultaneously. First, that Meghan is a calculating and manipulative mastermind capable of orchestrating and sustaining a multi-year influence campaign over a person with royal training, military service, and his own very strong-willed personality. Second, that Harry is so passive, so malleable, so utterly without agency that he has simply been carried along by this campaign without ever exercising his own judgment. Both of these things cannot be true. And frankly, neither of them are. Paulette said it simply. This man is a grown man. 4 words. Enormous implications. Because the moment you accept that Harry is a grown man capable of making his own choices, the entire Meghan is controlling him narrative loses its foundation. It doesn't just weaken, it becomes structurally incoherent. If Harry is a grown man, and he is, then his choices are his choices. His choice to speak about grief, trauma, and mental health is his choice. His choice to prioritize his family's safety and well-being over institutional loyalty is his choice. His choice to remain committed to his marriage, his children, and the life he has built outside the royal spotlight is his choice. You can disagree with those choices, that's legitimate, but you cannot simultaneously respect Harry as an adult and also insist that all his decisions are actually Meghan's doing. Pick one. And the fact that so many people choose the option that simultaneously demeans both of them, casting her as manipulator and him as victim, reveals that this was never actually about concern for Harry. It was about finding a framework that allowed continued criticism of Meghan without having to directly confront Harry's own clearly stated, consistently maintained, freely expressed positions. Paulette used strong language, deliberately, without hedging. The tone is very distasteful, absolutely disgusting. And the instinct, in certain media-trained contexts, is to immediately push back on the strength of the language, to say, isn't that a bit much? Isn't that overstating it? But let's actually assess whether the language is proportionate. We are talking about years, not weeks, not a bad run of headlines, of sustained, coordinated, relentless negative coverage of a single person. Coverage that, when examined closely, has included racially coded language dressed up as etiquette criticism, coverage that has used unnamed, unverifiable sources to make serious character allegations, coverage that has applied microscopic scrutiny to trivial personal choices while ignoring genuinely important public interest stories. Coverage that has, by the admission of people within the media industry itself, been disproportionate, selective, and, in some cases, demonstrably false. And this coverage has had real consequences. Not just reputational consequences for Meghan personally, though those are real too, but consequences for public discourse, for how people think about race and gender and institutional power, for what kind of scrutiny gets normalized, for what kind of narrative gets treated as acceptable, credible, and worth amplifying. Given all of that, given the full weight and duration and documented impact of what we're actually describing, is distasteful too strong? Is absolutely disgusting an overreaction? Or is it in fact a proportionate response from someone who looked at the full picture and called it what it is? Paulette wasn't performing outrage. She was naming reality. And the people who found her language excessive were notably the same people who had spent considerable time treating the output of that media system as perfectly normal and entirely acceptable. That tells you something about where the tolerance thresholds actually sit. Here's a pattern that plays out every single time someone like Paulette Hamilton steps into one of these conversations and refuses to operate within the established framework. The disruption is treated as more shocking than the original narrative. The calm, logical pushback generates more resistance, more heat, more "is she serious right now?" energy than the years of demonstrably biased coverage that prompted it. And this is worth sitting with. Because if the dominant narrative were truly solid, truly based on objective evidence, truly defensible under fair scrutiny, it would not need to react so defensively to being questioned. Arguments built on solid foundations welcome scrutiny. They invite challenge. They get stronger, not weaker, when examined closely. Arguments built on accumulated bias, selective framing, and repetition as proof, those arguments react to scrutiny with aggression, deflection, and the kind of pearl-clutching outrage that suggests the questioner has committed some kind of social violation simply by asking. And that reaction is, itself, revealing. Every time someone responds to calm, logical pushback on Meghan coverage with disproportionate defensiveness, with, well, that's extremely unfair to say, and you're being very one-sided, and actually, she's a divisive figure, and that's just the truth. They are telling you that the narrative cannot survive honest examination, that it needs protection, that it depends on not being looked at too closely. Paulette looked at it closely, on live television, with logic, and the reaction she received confirmed everything she was arguing. Someone might reasonably ask, why does this clip matter? Why does this specific panel discussion on this specific day deserve this level of attention and analysis? Because of what it represents. Not the individual argument, not the specific points scored in a specific debate, but the space it creates. Every time someone with a platform steps into these conversations and refuses to accept the premises, every time someone names the pattern instead of debating the individual data points, every time someone looks at the full picture, the years of headlines, the structural bias, the impossible standards, the racially coded subtext, the relentless negativity, and calls it clearly and calmly by its name, it creates space. Space for people watching at home who have been told their observations are wrong, their instincts are biased, their support is embarrassing, to feel seen. Space for the possibility that the dominant narrative is not objective truth, but constructed reality, and that constructed realities can be challenged, questioned, and dismantled. Space for a different kind of conversation, one based on evidence rather than repetition, on fairness rather than habit, on actual journalism rather than the machinery of resentment dressed up as public interest. Paulette Hamilton created that space in a conversation that usually doesn't allow for it. And that matters, not because it will immediately change everything, but because change never comes from silence. It comes from people who look at the script and decide not to read their assigned lines. Here's where we land. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, has been subjected to years of coverage so lopsided, so structurally negative, so demonstrably disconnected from the standards applied to her peers, that describing it as merely critical is a disservice to the word. Harry, Duke of Sussex, has been consistently and condescendingly stripped of his own agency in the telling of his own story, a man reduced to a supporting character in a narrative about his wife, despite making his positions, his motivations, and his choices extraordinarily clear. And the people who have pushed back against this, calmly, logically, with evidence, have been treated as disruptive, one-sided, or simply wrong. Paulette Hamilton sat in that studio, looked at the full picture, and refused to pretend it was normal. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She just used logic in a space that usually doesn't allow it. And the discomfort that created, the defensiveness, the pushback, the immediate pivot to sinister motive attribution, confirmed, more effectively than any counterargument could, that she was right. The pattern is real. The bias is documented. The system produces what it was designed to produce, and it continues to operate not because it's beyond scrutiny, but because scrutiny has been in short supply. Until moments like this one, until voices like Paulette's, until someone simply says, "Look at the headlines," and trusts you to see what's actually there. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.